Good evening. My name's Michael Allen. I'm within Mass Incarceration, and I'm this week's host of Public Access Public Affairs Show. In the studio tonight, I'm honored to be interviewing Victoria Rusk. Victoria Rusk is with Heart of Justice. It's her company, and she's a mitigation specialist. As some of you know from having seen earlier shows, I'm involved in the fight to reform the criminal justice system, and I do it on several levels. I took on Whole Foods a few years ago about getting out of the prison labor, the slave labor business. I go to the jail, have for several years running, and bring gifts to children because I find people's hearts soften when they think about the children that are involved in this. But there is a lot of work to be done in a lot of areas: juvenile justice, the school to prison pipeline, geriatric justice, wrongful convictions, of which there are a lot. There is a lot of work to be done. And my guest tonight is working within the system in an area which relatively few people know much about. And I have to admit, I'm one of them. I met her several years ago on the prison show. And we became friends and started talking, and I realized she schooled me on what it is she does, and I slowly came to realize how important the work she does is. And like I said, I'm honored to have her in the studio tonight to conduct this interview and find a little bit more about her, and maybe educate some of the viewers out there on options they may have, and using some of the skills she has and some of the knowledge she has to help them navigate if they should find themselves involved in the criminal justice system. And with that, I'd like to introduce Victoria Rusk. Good evening, Victoria.
Hi, good evening.
I'm just going to jump right in this, and I'm going to ask you, who are you, and what is it that you do in the legal system?
Well, I'm a mitigation specialist, and in the legal system, what I do is I mitigate a sentence less than the maximum. I assist attorneys in learning about the life of the client and helping to develop a narrative about the life of the person who is accused. And the attorneys utilize that information at the trial level in my profession for my business. They use that information to negotiate a plea or for sentencing for a jury or a judge, what I like to call decision makers, because there's different decision makers in this level of criminal justice. So, and I learn about the person who's accused, from the very beginning, from, right when they are charged, can be appointed to the case or hired outright. And I'm learning the real why behind the crime, the why, what were the decisions or choices that this person made, or the life circumstances of this person.
In other words, you're making them more human to the judge.
Yeah, humanizing them. Humanize thyself. That's what I wanted to talk about today, because not every case gets a mitigation specialist. And I feel that people who might be watching this program and people who, tune into the prison show where we met, that I would like for them to be able to help themselves in some form or fashion. So I've taken it upon myself, as a business owner and entrepreneur, I'm able to utilize my time the way that I want to, and a part of that is to give back to the community.
Great. Well, it just occurred to me, traditionally have most attorneys handle their own mitigation needs, and if this is this mitigation specialist, is this a relatively new occupational title for people, or is it growing? I mean, what's the history of this thing?
Well, I feel like it's new for people to know now, and in 2003 was when the ABA, the American Bar Association, came out with the guidelines for mitigation specialists on capital murder cases. So I feel like mitigation has definitely been around for a really long time, way before I ever got into the game, way before 2003. Of course, people were utilizing mitigation, but sometimes it seemed to me, what I learned whenever I started this work, was that a lot of times mitigation witnesses, character witnesses, a lot of time they're called, or character letters that maybe that the attorneys would gather and do. They'd put a witness on a stand. It would be like a mom or a grandma or an aunt or a girlfriend or a wife, crying or being, really like letting their heart out on the stand about, please don't, sentence my son, my father, my husband to this long period of time. Like, he's a good person, he's a good person. And that's kind of the classic mitigation, I think, that has been used a lot in sentencing, whereas real mitigation is more about the actual choices, life circumstances, different mitigation themes, poverty, lack of resources, race, not mental illness, brain injury, being, maybe being involved in a gang. How does the person get into a gang? Stuff like that, really is the more in-depth mitigation that is more I would say that an attorney can really take that information and use it to be able to get a proper sentence for their client. So in 2003, when those ABA guidelines came out, that's when it made it mandatory for a mitigation specialist in capital murder cases that involve the death penalty. And so that's where I feel that the field of work grew more. And so more and more were people able to get a mitigation specialist, but then that field and that person and that professional had to be created. I started doing mitigation in 2011. And so from that point forward, as a mitigation specialist and somebody that comes in, 10 years or so after the ABA guidelines were established, now we are able to utilize more narrative, more story, have more witnesses, and judges are more likely to approve a mitigation specialist in non-capital cases because they've gotten used to appointing a mitigation specialist in capital cases.
So you're saying that the courts are starting to appoint mitigation specialists in like, robbery cases or maybe
Felony
assault
cases.
Across a broad range of felony cases.
Yeah.
That's great. Well, as I was listening to you and I was thinking about what you said about attorneys, would solicit these a lot of times, I guess, emotional pleas, this testimony and this written testimony from members of the defendant's family or friends. And you're saying that what you do goes way beyond this emotional level. And it sounds to me that, like the ABA, and I appreciate the fact you're so young. It wasn't that long ago. It was only 15 years ago that they set up these guidelines for this. So that makes it a relative newcomer, this field, to accepted, I don't know what you call it, legal jurisprudence, the practice of law and the procedures in courts. So it makes it relatively new. But it sounds like they recognize the fact that there needs to be more for these defendants than just their mom up there crying.
Well, for sure, yeah. And people want to understand crime more than ever. I mean, all these shows on TV, on cable networks about, Snapped, or I don't even know, on the ID channel, CSI, Law and Order. People really want to know what's going on and the why behind the crime. And demonizing a human being is not helpful to anybody.
Right.
So having your mom on the stand or your wife on the stand crying and pleading, that has its place, and it can get really emotional in court. It can get really emotional in mitigation interviews. But that's not always going to be the actual thing that helps reduce the sentence.
Right.
Because the emotional decisions are a lot of time what's being made, but it's out of anger and fear and and ignorance by jurors who don't know exactly what's going on with this person,
Right.
and they're just really scared, and they're in fear because of what they just saw played out for them in the trial. And so to mitigate that kind of fear is through education and understanding, and it has to be, mitigation makes it available for that education for the juror, for the court to be put in place in such the way that they're understanding how a person gets from A, B to C.
Yeah, you and I have talked before, and we both agree that the criminal justice system in the last 35, 40 years has become a meat grinder. It's grown exponentially since the 80s, and some people would argue that somebody or someone, I'm not saying the government, dumped a lot of cocaine into depressed, disenfranchised neighborhoods, and a lot of people got caught up in the criminal justice system to the point of the numbers increasing from the early 70s from 350,000 people behind bars to 2.3 million today. And by the way, this state we're in has the largest prison population of any state in the United States, including California, which has 12 million more people in the state. But Texas is number one. So you're kind of at the middle of the firestorm, and I understand, a lot of what you do is death penalty cases and capital cases, and I get that. But it has I think if I understand what you're saying, there's a trickle-down effect to the work you do to other courts and other defendants wanting your services. So how do you see it growing? I mean, have you seen it grow in the time that you've been involved?
Since I've been a mitigation specialist, has more mitigation work been implemented in cases? Is that what you're asking?
Yes, that's what I'm asking.
Yeah, definitely. Every time I get a call for a felony case, I'm like, yeah, we're moving in the right direction. But I get more calls for death penalty cases than I do for felony cases. And the thing about felony cases is, and mitigation specialist, is the amount of funding that's approved in court-appointed cases. When we're talking about private cases, somebody's family can write me a check and I can get the work done and it's fine. But with court-appointed cases, it's amount of hours and time. And since you want to treat each case like a unique case, a unique person, because that's exactly what it is, I don't know what that person is going to really need. But implementing mitigation is becoming more and more common, whether the attorney is doing it him or herself, or they're getting a mitigation specialist to look at certain issues like mental health, like traumatic brain injury, and the story evolved behind that. But yeah, even mitigation in capital cases is evolving more and more, where we're getting less and less death sentences in our state. So it's becoming, to me, where I saw the need and what I really wanted to improve was getting more information, teaching, tools, and being able to frame the narrative of a person's life who has a mental illness, a behavioral disorder, or a brain injury, and trying to get that information into their narrative for a judge or a DA or a jury to understand, how these things happen. Because hurt people, and people who, have some biological hurt or problem can do some of the, extreme crimes that I'm aware of. So, I'm happy with the direction that mitigation is going, and I'm here to push it along. I want it to get a little bit further, a little bit faster. And the way that I can do that is doing talks like this and doing what I can do to put out information about mitigation and how to utilize it, and the difference between good and bad mitigation. Like what's more helpful and more useful to your client or to your case. I'm here to support the attorneys in getting the information that they need and helping them help me deliver it to them for their client.
Right. Well, I think what I'm here, and I know from personal experience with you, that I had very little idea what you did. I thought my idea was that The mitigation process happened after a person was found guilty and before he was sentenced, and that's what I thought it was about. And you presented stuff, but you over the course of the last few months, and even beyond that, the more I talked to you, the more I realized that there was a lot more to this mitigation process than just that. And I think the work you're doing to educate other people is really important, and I can speak firsthand to that because you educated me. And I've been looking at the criminal justice system for years, and yet what you do kind of fell through the cracks, you know, and the more I talked to you, the more I realized, and as we discussed it, the more we both realized that you had to try to get it out there, and I had to try to facilitate that as I could. And that reminds me, I remember when I first talked to you about this, that you were a little reluctant to come on this program. Mm-hmm. Why was that?
Oh, well, just because, you know, information can be really powerful and then it can be abused. And I think you understand the abuse of power. And I just wanted to make sure, you know, that's why I wanted to have a few conversations with you about what this show was going to be like or what it was going to be about. And I wanted to make sure that, you know, it wasn't going to be about the problems, because I'm really only interested in talking about the solutions and giving the solutions or my idea of solutions and brainstorming those solutions with you and with other people about how that can help somebody that's in the county jail right now, mm-hmm. and somebody that is related or loves somebody that's in the county jail right now, mm-hmm. Or out on bond, or somebody that's getting ready to go to jury duty tomorrow.
Right. Right. Well, I think, you know, I think the population of Harris County Adult Detention Center, I think it hovers around a little over 9,000, between 9 and 10,000. So there's a lot of people behind bars here in this county, mm-hmm. awaiting trial. Yeah. I think most of the people in there have never been convicted because they're awaiting trial. They can't afford bond. But I can't even imagine how many, you know, 40, 50, 60, 80,000 other people are out on bond, mm-hmm. and caught up in this process, yeah. and are waiting to go. So, you know, we may have 100,000 people getting ready to be cycled through the system. Right. And a lot of them don't have a lot of money, and they can't afford these high-priced lawyers that you know, our more well-heeled citizens can. So I just want you to tell me completely what it is that you do and how it benefits the person who's accused of a crime. I mean, I know we talked about after sentencing or before sentencing, pre-sentencing. Yeah. And I know that, but there's some other aspects of what you do that can even, did you tell me, determine the charges that are brought against them?
Well, we talked about a little bit like that. We talked a little bit about you know, the possibility of a DA downgrading charges. But, you know, honestly, that is for an attorney to be able to negotiate with their client a lot of times. So like, say a person is willing to testify against the co-defendant. That is a tool that the attorney can use to get the charge downgraded, perhaps, along with maybe some other mitigation or some other investigative facts that had come about. And so I feel like that's probably more of the likelihood to downgrade the charge. Not necessarily, I haven't experienced that personally where the DA was willing to downgrade a charge because the narrative was so good. Mm-hmm. No, but be able to reduce the sentence. You know, if a felony person getting convicted of a felony has 5 to 99, I feel like a narrative could, and mitigation evidence, mm-hmm. mitigation affidavits, records of, you know, medical records that could tell that person's story, education records that could help, mm-hmm. tell that person's story, mm-hmm. That would be able to reduce the sentence of that, mm-hmm. conviction or possible conviction. And if a person knows that they're likely to get convicted, that doesn't mean that they're guilty. They might even be innocent, but they have the likelihood to still get convicted, then mitigation could assist in getting that sentence closer to the lesser.
Yeah, I understand. What now? You work, and I'm sure you I don't know if you hang out with them, but you know of other mitigation specialists here in Houston that also work in the court system. And I know you know of other specialists throughout the country that you have connections with. And I'm curious, to your knowledge, have any of them had an impact on the charges that the DA brings against an individual because of the mitigation work that they do?
I'm going to say yes, but I can't think of any specific examples. And I think that it's more rare for them to be able to do such changes, because that's really an attorney-DA conversation, not a mitigation specialist attorney decision or negotiation. That's a part of the negotiation between the defense attorney and the DA. The DA is the one that is establishing the charges on the person. And the defense attorney is bringing what I would call negotiation tools, mitigation, evidence, their client willing to testify, holes in the cop's investigation, whatever, is bringing those negotiation tools to the DA to be like, this is how it's going to go down in court, or this is how, these are the things that could, maybe not give you the conviction that you want to get. So we want this, or my client will be able to take that. That's in a plea negotiation. And I don't get involved in that too much, as I'm more so involved in supporting the attorney to tell the story of the client and how they got to be here. Because I'm most concerned and interested in cases where the evidence can prove and show that the person is guilty. Because if you're innocent, I really can't help you. I can only help people who are guilty, because I'm trying to mitigate the why behind that crime, like why or how did they get there. So I have criminal compassion, real criminal compassion, not fighting for the innocent people. That's somebody else's project.
Looks like we have a caller holding right now. Caller, are you on the line? Do you have a question?
Yes, I do. What I'd like to know is, what if she had one goal that she could advocate for right now, what would it be?
One goal I can advocate right now, that would be compassion, like I was saying, criminal compassion, and forgiveness.
Compassion and forgiveness.
I mean, that's kind of what's happening in my day-to-day work life. Is whenever I'm out interviewing people, talking to people about the person that they care for, that they love, and trying to figure out who they are or who they were then, or getting the story, is an opportunity to see where a person's at. Some people don't want to talk to me. They don't want to help a person who's accused of murder, and because in their mind they did it. And so there's a lot of roadblocks that a mitigation specialist goes through to try to overcome those barriers. So at every opportunity, I have to exercise my compassion, and then I'm giving them an opportunity to do that too. And eventually, in a lot of cases, depending on how long the case investigation is, because these can last easy a year, and in capital murder cases, 2, 3, 4 years. I would say that that's probably the best.
So you're saying that you see these defendants in a more human light than maybe the system puts them in?
Oh yeah, for sure. For sure. And even in, and so you're, the people that love them, say their mom, their sister, their third grade teacher, their neighbor, their coworker, they don't know what to do with this news of, their coworker, their son, their ex-husband, their father being accused of, murder or rape or robbery or multiple robberies, or this is their 5th DUI or whatever. They don't know what to do with that information. But the go-to thing to do for a lot of humans is to be mad, to be ashamed, to feel guilty, and to distance themselves from the situation. And so then when a mitigation specialist comes and says, hey, this is what's going on, and I'm working on the sentencing portion, and no, he hasn't been convicted yet, or she hasn't been convicted yet, the trial hasn't started, we're doing all this, that in turn creates an opportunity for them to choose what they want to do or how they want to be or show up for this person in their life.
Well, it's interesting. I had a young college student ask me one time if I thought that putting people behind bars affected their humanity. Mm-hmm. And I said, it affects the people's humanity that are on the other side of the bars.
Yeah, you're right.
Because we stopped looking at this as a fully vested human being.
Yes.
And that is a problem. People turn into numbers, and they're just, like I said, this is a meat grinder, and we feed people on one side and we take the hamburger out the other. But I wanted to ask you about the timing on this request to the court for a mitigation specialist to be assigned to the case. Would you say for the primary reason of arming the attorney with more information, who he can, even in the plea bargaining stage, to where they're deciding on charges from the state, between the state and the defense attorney, that he's more well armed to represent this person and some of the mitigating circumstances. Would you say that it's important that people get on top of this as soon as they can? Yeah,
I mean, and when the attorney gets appointed to the case or hired, then if there's any question of guilt, innocence, you need to go ahead and get a mitigation specialist right then, just like you need to get an investigator. Mm-hmm. An attorney, for the most part, goes to court. They know the law, and they're your representative. The investigator goes out and gets the who, the what, the where, the how. And the mitigation specialist is figuring out the why and building a community around the case, getting the witnesses, getting the affidavits or whatever, getting the records that are going to support some of these things. And so, getting a team appointed as soon as possible is the best thing that you can do, if it is granted. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's case law out there right now that supports getting a mitigation specialist granted for a felony case. But if your attorney doesn't know that, doesn't exercise that, it's not the judge's job to be like, hey, you could use a mitigation specialist. Mm-hmm. They're not thinking like that. That's not the way that it's going. So, and that's why I feel like coming on this show is wonderful, to give that information to the actual citizen that might need a mitigation specialist, because not a lot of people know what it is or how to utilize it. And so knowing like, hey, my son was involved in this, or my daughter was this, and they didn't actually do the crime, but they were there and they got the same charge.
Right.
And so you will need a mitigation specialist, because you can get convicted for just being there. And,
right.
And in law schools and stuff, I never went to law school, I'm not a lawyer, but I do know that they do teach attorneys the importance, or future attorneys, the importance of preparing for punishment from the beginning. But when you get out in the real world and you're a practicing attorney, you have to put that into practice. And if you don't know what to do or how to do, then get you a mitigation specialist to teach you the ropes to get where you need to go, and then do it yourself. Or if you can't afford a mitigation specialist, then know that there's certain things that your attorneys is going to need from you. And if you don't have the mental capacity to be able to do, find the smartest person and ask them to help you figure this out.
Mm-hmm. Well, in cases where you have a court-appointed attorney, do I understand that the courts are able to pay for mitigation specialists?
Yeah. I take all, mainly all, I would say like 90% of my practice is court-appointed cases.
Okay, so the court will actually appoint and pay for your services. That's important to remember, I think. Now, this whole time we've been talking about the benefit of what you do for the person who's been accused. But are there benefits, and in your opinion, if there are, what are the benefits to the system of having this mitigation process and mitigation specialists in the process?
I mean, I feel like the benefit to the system is the whole humanizing aspect that you kind of talked about. You know, when a juror gets mitigation and understands a little bit more about who this person is that they're, you know, sentencing, then they can utilize that information to give a unique sentence. I feel like, you know, when even for judges, I think even for, you know, judges too, or sentencing, I think they need a little bit more information. I even in DAs too. I mean, they're wanting to understand this person and the why and all of that. I mean, I don't know, I feel like everybody is. And so to me, mitigation benefits the system by giving justice to everybody involved. And, you know, these harsh sentences or extreme sentences, you know, 60 years, you know, just like extended amount of time, depending on what the crime is, I feel like it's dehumanizing to the person who's giving, to the judge.
Right.
Because they're having to, you know, lock this person up for several years. And a young person, like, you know, a 20-year-old getting 60 years, I mean, it's really terrible. So, I mean,
crazy, right.
I feel like, you know, depending on what the crime is and, you know, how society is going at that time, I feel like mitigation is humanizing for everyone so they know who they're sentencing.
Okay, maybe we need to get back to that because we have another caller on hold. Caller, you're on air.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes. Go ahead, please.
There is so much about race and injustice going on in the world, and I'm very overwhelmed. It's all overwhelming. And Miss Victoria, you look white, and a lot of the people that are in jail are people of color. How does race play a role in your job? Can you talk about race, please?
Yes, thank you. Yes, I can talk about race. Yeah, I mean, I feel like that's a huge part of my job and something that I have to overcome. Being a white woman doing this job, I go to houses, neighborhoods, places where I'm the only, you know, white person. And so it makes things a little bit uncomfortable for the neighbors, you know, like I have to really be thoughtful of that. And the best thing that I can do is to be sensitive to the needs of others, to be understanding and open, to do the trainings that need to be. Like, this is a perfect opportunity for me to plug the People's Institute for Survival and Beyond. That's where I learned about undoing racism work. And I feel that everyone in my field of work should look up a workshop for the People's Institute for Survival and Beyond and go and get the analysis about race in this country. And then that education is such a shift in your filter of the way that you see the world that it completely improved my business. And I was, you know, I'm not gonna lie, I was doing racist things at work, unknowingly, ignorant, hurting people. And I had somebody come to me and say, hey, what are you doing? You know, you're making your client, you're making my community look like we live in a jungle or something. And that's not the way that I want to be represented. And thank God that, you know, he put his arm around me and helped me find the way. He gave me compassion, thank God. And so dealing with race is just knowing, being aware of what's going on and what's going on around, and being able to look people in the eye, being able to give people your complete attention and listening, and showing each other that we matter, that you matter, that I want to know. And so I feel like as a mitigation specialist, whenever I have to go, you know, to the projects, whenever I have to go talk to somebody that's, you know, generations older than me, that is just uncomfortable with me in their house, being the best Victoria that I can be. I mean, I can't be anybody else, right? And with attorneys and, understanding race and mitigation, I feel like the best thing that we can do is I try to talk to attorneys. One of the examples that I tell attorneys, especially white attorneys, is about tell me a time that you were racist towards somebody, and tell me a time that somebody was racist towards you. And I want those stories. I want to know. I'm doing mitigation on my attorney right then and there. Like I'm trying to understand who they are as a person and what their life experience has been like, and trying to help them identify that within themselves so that they hopefully can just take that story and utilize it, whether it's for jury selection, opening or closing argument or something, even if it just gets them in touch with their humanity a little bit.
I agree with the caller that the criminal justice system is shot through and through with racism. I think on all levels. It sounds like you're trying to be aware of the problem, and you're trying to take measures. But I just have a question, kind of to piggyback on the caller. Do you know of mitigation specialists in Houston that are black or Hispanic?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Okay. So good.
There's not many of them. I can only think of 2.
Okay. Well, what is the total mitigation specialists in this city? Do you know? About?
I would say about 12.
There's only 12. Okay. Okay. Now, I'm sorry, caller. We have to go to the next caller. I hope Victoria answered your question. Other caller, we have you on air.
Hi. My name is Peter, and I'd like to know about how many cases do you get at a given time, and how many cases do you have over the course of a year?
Well, I really don't try to work on more than 5 cases at a time, because that's a heavy load, especially if they're capital murder cases. But I know I have colleagues that have 12, 20. It just depends on what their practice is like, and what they can handle. But I really don't ever try to do more than 5 cases at a time, because there's other things that the way that I do my work, that's the best for me. And so I might have 5 cases at a time, but I only have 1 case right now. So the team that I'm working on right now, I have an agreement with the team that I'm going to work solely on this case for the next 4 to 5 months until we get the death penalty waived. So I won't take any more cases.
And how to get to the caller's question? How many? Let's say, how many was the most cases you ever worked on in a 12-month period?
Oh, 5.
5 was the total? Okay.
Yeah, I don't really go over that because it's just too much work.
Okay, great. Thank you, caller. We have another caller. Caller, you're online. You're on air.
No, we lost.
That's it? Okay. Well, great. Now, did you finish answering what benefits?
Oh.
Caller, you're on air.
It's gone.
Okay, we lost another one. Okay, well. Okay, then did you finish answering the question about how what you do benefits the system? I mean, you got to the end of that.
Yeah, I feel like it just humanizes everyone in their own way. If it's a judge or a jury, like they get all the information they need to be able to do their job properly, and I feel like that's humanizing. When you don't know certain stuff, and people are getting sentenced, or they're just, or maybe, I don't know. I couldn't really put myself in a judge's shoes. I just try to give them the information that I get, and deliver it as fair as I possibly can without any judgment, because that's their job to judge. I'm just there to deliver the information. But I feel like that's how I can humanize this system, is giving them an opportunity to know this person that they're going to sentence, and Yeah, and humanizing the people that are in the system, that are caught up in the system. I mean, the best way you can humanize any human being is to listen to them.
Well, that was my next question. You don't have to mention any names, but can you draw from your experience and kind of lay it out, kind of step by step? I'm sure you follow some kind of template where you touch on this area and that area and that area to humanize the client for the court. How do you do that?
There's really no template because every case is unique, because every human is unique, and every brain is unique. So there's really no way to follow a template. The only template I can think of is that first things first, whenever I'm investigating a case and I'm learning about a person's life, I'm going to look and see where their intellectual ability is, if they have any mental health issue or behavioral disorder, and if they have a brain injury. That's first things first, and that's on the top of the list to do. But everything else is really as unique as your thumbprint. And you just have to be able to be open and listening to the person and what they're telling you, like the client, letting them guide what they think or who I should talk to maybe, and just following it is, because they need the answers if they're going to sign a plea. You know, they need the answers if they're going to go to trial. They need to know what's going to be presented so they can make an educated decision about their life. But other than investigating those, top things that have to do with the health of the brain, other than that, no, it's on a case-by-case basis.
Oh, okay, great. It looks like we have a caller online. Caller, you're on air.
Hi.
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 I have a question for Victoria. So many of the people that are in jail have mental illnesses. So what does the mitigation specialist do for people who are sick and commit crimes?
Yeah, we were just talking about that. Whenever the person is mentally ill, and I know that, and, I try to find all the documents that are there to help support that. So whether it's medical records from the jail, because they could get diagnosed there, medical records just from their own personal history, and if they've been to jail before, getting medical records from that, and then interviewing people that know that whenever they've had an episode or they, have gone through some things, getting the witnesses to that time in their life, and the client is only going to be able to say so much about themselves. We're not the best historian for ourselves because we just remember things the way we remember them. But people that are on the outside looking in, getting their version of the story of what happened or could have happened, and being able to piece the pieces of the puzzle together. You have to take in consideration that a lot of people that I'm talking to are living in poverty, a lack of resources. When I say poverty, I mean a lack of resources, not a lack of money.
To get back to what you was asking about people who have diminished ability,
Yeah.
and in particular, because you say you work in capital murder cases,
Yeah.
that this state in particular, and a lot of states in general, have shown a willingness to execute people with low IQ scores and diminished ability.
Yeah.
So now, when you mitigate the circumstances of a person's diminished ability in court, is it an uphill struggle for you to make the court even consider that?
Not at the trial level. I haven't had, that's not my experience. At the trial level, if they understand the person's mental health and mental health background, and it's not easy, it takes some time, some hours, but you can track a person's life and how they got from A to B to C, and then how people and how their environment reacted to them. I've had a client not being competent to stand trial. that worked out successly for me.
Well,
So in
I'm
my
glad-
experience,
I'm
that
glad you've had some success because I see it on a pretty regular basis that basically mentally challenged people are put
It's a
to death
complicated
in this
issue.
state and all over
yeah.
this country.
Well, and you're saying put to death. That's post-conviction. That's habeas corpus.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm talking about on the trial level. So that's a difference in the conversation.
Okay,
a
we
little
have
bit.
another call before we run out of time. Caller, you're on air.
Hi. Hi, yeah,
Hi.
I had a little question to Victoria and Mike.
Okay, go ahead.
Yes, I'd like to know how someone with limited resources could get some help for mitigation.
What someone with limited resources can do for themselves as
Can do
far
for
as
themselves,
mitigation. Yeah,
Yes.
that's a good question.
Okay, well, I feel like what a person can do, because I want to stay or be thoughtful about their own, intellectual ability or disability. But somebody that has, let's say, a high school diploma, they don't have to be the person that's actually in jail, because it's kind of hard to do your own work whenever you're in jail. But if you're out of jail, or if you wanting to help the attorney that's representing your loved one, assisting with getting records, so getting those requested from the school that they graduated from or did not graduate from, medical records, requesting those. Like if you know that they, got hit in the head with a bat at some time and you were able to go to Ben Taub or whatever local hospital that city was and be able to get that, to give that to the attorney. If they were in special education classes, being able to get those records, or even to get the teacher that was a special ed teacher on board, understanding, reaching out and building your own community around you, saying, hey, I made this mistake, or my son made this mistake, or my daughter made this mistake, or my mom made this mistake, and we're looking for help. Can you, a testifier, can you write a character letter, or would you go talk to the attorney, or would you talk to this person? Building that community, it takes a lot of legwork, and whenever you're working 2 or 3 jobs, it's not easy, and the best way to be able to get that time is having an attorney that's able to get you a reset and get the time.
So you just have to be persistent and talk to the attorney and ask them if they want you to get these school records, these medical records, these special ed records.
Yeah.
And just try and work with the attorney and tell them that you're either the person who isn't in jail or you're a friend. Great. Looks like we're getting a lot of phone calls. You're a really popular lady tonight. We have another phone caller. Caller, you're on air.
Hello?
Hello. Go ahead.
Yes, I have a question for Victoria. Where do you see the future of mitigation in courts, especially in capital cases? I find that this is somewhat new to me, just hearing about this. I want to know what your
Take on.
your vision is, or what your idea is as far as like how mitigation is used in the future, in the next 10 years from now.
I feel like in the next 10 years, mitigation is going to be more used in non-capital cases, and I feel like mitigation is being used better and better every year in death penalty cases. I mean, we did get a couple of death verdicts this year. Yes, we have. And you just wonder what's going on. There's a lot of factors that go in death penalty decisions, like the way that they pick the jury. And so that's critical. I think everything is making mitigation deliverable, like a story, and the jury being able to recognize the connection between the attorney and the client, and juries being able to just kind of see the humanity play out in court. Now, I'm not an expert in that, but I feel that mitigation is going to, raise the vibration of the justice system, the criminal defense system. And so I see mitigation being utilized more and more. And the more that people know about mitigation, the more that jurors know and understand it, the more that potential defendants know and their loved ones know and understand it, and attorneys for that matter. There's still opportunity for attorneys to learn how do they deliver a story and how do they practice and get into the groove of delivering the story. But they need the tools to be able to do that. So I feel like mitigation is going to reduce sentencing more and more the more that it is utilized properly, and the more that more medical terms and some of the defendants being looked at as actual patients, because that's what they are, is going to be mitigating in of itself. And I feel like everybody is searching for the why behind crime, and mitigation is the answer. And I feel like you're saying, to be able to attack mass incarceration and on different levels, this is the trial level. This is the answer for me in what I've seen. So I feel that, 10 years from now, I don't know. I'm in the business of putting myself out of business, so once the death penalty ends, so many things are going to shift and change. And that's a conversation that a lot of people don't want to talk about it ending, but it is going to end. And it's going to put other people out of business, but we'll just, as professionals, we'll shift and change and do mitigation in non-capital cases.
That's a great place to wrap this up because you're right. The criminal justice system has become big business. There are a lot, 40 years ago compared to today, there are a lot less judges, there are a lot less bailiffs, there are a lot less police, and there are a lot less prisons because criminal justice has turned into big, big business for a lot of people, including defense attorneys. There's a lot of people that make their living off of the fact that a lot of people are put behind bars. And yeah, you and I have had this discussion about, how this started and how it's just increased unbelievably in the last 40 years. Even though crime rates have gone down, incarceration rates have gone up. So there's something behind this, and yet all I can do as an activist is chip away at it. And I think even you, all you can do as a mitigation specialist is chip away at this and try and educate people and try and network them in, bring them into what's going on and have them open their eyes to the reality of what's going on around us. It's unfortunate mass incarceration has become big business for a whole lot of people, not the least of which are bondsmen and actually even record companies that tow people's cars, and people lose their cars. If they're in jail a week, they can't afford to get their cars anymore, and the record company gets their title, and they do quite well, thank you. And the bail bond system, there's only two countries in the world that use our system, us and the Philippines. Nobody else uses it because it's so archaic and it's so stilted against the poor defendants. This is a problem. You and I, we both appear on, and this is a shameless plug, on the Prison Show on 9 to 11 on Friday nights. You're welcome, Ray. But we've talked about, and we've sat around with other activists, and that's what I want to know. I know this is your livelihood. This is your occupation. But beyond that, do you consider yourself an activist?
No, I don't consider myself an activist. I consider myself, an entrepreneur, a businesswoman. And there's opportunities within my business for me to be an advocate for my client or to be an advocate for defense attorneys. But I don't do the work that an activist does. What I do, or what I try to do, is bring compassion and forgiveness within my work and understanding. Me and you have had some conversations where we don't see eye to eye. We're teaching each other things. And so I wouldn't consider myself an activist because I feel like in my heart, and to call myself an activist would be that I would be, out protesting and doing stuff that activists do, and I just go to work. So
I think you do great, and I think the work you do is great, and I've been honored to be able to talk to you tonight because I think the work you do is important, and like I said, with me chipping away and you chipping away and a dozen other people chipping away at a dozen different directions, hopefully we can change the momentum of this thing that's grown to be such a destructive force in poor communities. You know, I don't know about if you're able to mitigate the circumstances of a person not being able to feed their family without having to sell a little something in their neighborhood, which, by the way, has no industry. And God forbid that they're a formerly incarcerated person. So many doors are closed to them.
Yeah.
You know, the economic factors, you know, involved in people who get caught up in the drug culture, I don't think enough has been paid enough attention has been paid to what society does to these people to push them in a corner and dare them to come out and dare them to try to take care of their children by any means necessary, because that's what we as human beings, as mothers and fathers, we do what it takes to get the job done, to feed our kids, to get their little tennis shoes so they can go to school. And yet I don't think enough attention has been paid to that. And I hope in your work that maybe sometimes you can have this conversation with some of these judges and some of these attorneys, that we need to look at what we're doing to these disenfranchised, depressed community. But with that, we have 30 seconds. Is there anything you'd like to say in closing, Victoria?
I just want to say thank you for this opportunity, and yeah, I mean, in particular about, you know, drug dealers that you're saying, yeah, they have their story too. They're businessmen, they're businesswomen, and their story does come across in my work and the work that I've been able to implement. And those stories, all in all, when it comes to the criminal defense attorneys that I work with, if I can give them the tools that they need to be able to deliver a better story than the DA, we win.
I got it. You're right. We do. This has been Michael Allen with Mass Incarceration. I've been interviewing Victoria Rusk with the Hearts of Justice. She's a mitigation specialist. We hope we've brought some light on this subject to a few people out there in TV land, and we look forward to maybe doing another show. It seemed like we had a lot of callers and a lot of interest. And thank you very much for joining us this evening.